Good afternoon, folks. We are live and up and running once again. Let me get everything switched over to the right layout. We'll make sure we do a bit of a sound check, and we'll get started with today's jam stream. All right, the right layout, and make sure my sources aren't duplicated. In fact, we'll do it like this. Can everybody hear me okay? I haven't tweaked any settings on my 505 since last time, but let me know if I'm coming in either too loud or too soft, and I can tweak it on the fly. All right, so it has been a hot minute since we've done one of these. I'm trying to do them at least monthly and being moderately successful since I was technically on break for a couple weeks. But we are back once again, and I've prepared some talking points, and the structure of the jam stream today is going to be pretty similar to what we normally do. We will start with some warm-up drills just to get the blood flowing, everything warmed up, and then we will go into some discussion on technique and sound theory for beatboxing. I'm going to be picking up on the discussion of speed training today. That's going to be the topic we discuss when we get there. And then we will talk through that a bit, do some drills and practice, and then just like usual, the remainder of the time will be for brainstorming BGM track ideas. Hopefully everybody enjoys the ride. I forgot to update my stream title, so it might pop up while we're here. It should be updated now, but it might take a second for it to show up. But what we can do is get things off with some warm-up freestyle practice. It'd be a good chance for me to monitor the sound levels and see how everything is looking, make sure I'm not in the red. And so let's get started and jump into things. Leave my mic sensitivity right here, and then I'm going to keep an eye on the sound levels when we're doing instruments. All right, let's go. All right. One of these days, we need to bring back the nonstop freestyle challenge and see if I could beat my own personal best. I keep saying I want to do that, and I keep forgetting. But we will definitely try that again at some point. My record is like 30 minutes. Could totally beat it. All right. Let me change the caption here, and we will move on to technique and sound theory. Not sound theory. Sound theory. Sound levels look alright, and as long as I don't point some of my snares directly into my mic, I think it's not going to redline it. But like I said, if anybody wants me to tweak things, if it's either too loud or too soft throughout the stream, then just let me know. Alright, so like I mentioned near the top of the stream, I wonder. I'm going to try and refresh my deal real quick. I think I have to restart OBS for it to show up on my side, but hopefully on the stream side it's showing what my actual stream class is today. If not, I'll probably have to just change the title after the VOD goes up, but that's all right. I think people will figure it out that I'm not doing Look Outside today. But yeah, like I mentioned near the top of the stream, today's topic for technique and sound theory is speed training. And this is something we talk about off and on whenever we kind of return to the topic of practice and drill techniques for learning beatbox stuff and kind of continuously trying to improve and refine the skill set for beatboxing. And so I kind of wanted to break down the topics for speed training into the core instrument types for the beatbox toolkit. You know, your kick, hats, and snares, and some things that I've been working on and trying to practice in order to sharpen those basic skills. And then we can kind of translate that into some of the more intermediate to advanced skills. And then third, we could talk about how it relates to routine, pattern, construction, and actually putting all of those things together when it comes to trying to focus on speed, or if you want something that's speed focused for something that you're writing. And that's not any real big revelation. I think depending on who you talk to in the scene and their kind of style and focus, when it comes to speed, I think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards things like technicality, doing sound sets that are strung together and creating chains out of those sound sets in order to give the impression to the listener that you're doing something very rapid or very fast. And like we've talked about before, technicality is not synonymous with speed patterns. Very frequently, when people employ technicality in their patterns or routines, it is to kind of create these fast bursts of sounds all in connected chains. But that's not the definition of what that technique means on its own. It just means it's a combination of sounds being used together. What I kind of want to focus today, since we do a lot of discussions focusing on technicality, and that might be the next Jam Streams focus, kind of to check up on what we've been developing and been talking about since the last one, looking at my archive list. The last one was basses. We talked about the kind of developing basses and the kind of lower end breakthrough that I've been drilling, and that's been going pretty well. I feel like that low vibration bass that I've been working on is becoming more clean. I don't think I'm 100% able to do it on demand yet, but if I kind of warm up and then work on dropping the lower register down, then I'm pretty happy with the way that's going, but I need to just keep drilling it some more. And so if we start with the core concepts of the basics in the Beatbox toolkit, right? Your kicks, hats, and a snare. In this case, we'll start with the PF snare, one of the simple ones when people are learning. So we talked a bit about doing things like rhythm and metronome training in the beginning when you're learning how to do the sounds on their own, right? If you're brand new to beatboxing, especially if you don't have a music background and you're just trying to get control over doing the sounds, having them come out and having them be clean and come across in a kind of coherent and cohesive fashion. First step is obviously learning the sounds, how to make them come out. And when you talk about the kicks, we won't go into the actual mechanics of how to do the sounds unless people want me to go into an explanation, especially when we get to some of the more advanced stuff in a little bit. But what I found was helpful in the beginning was trying to think of, either by listening to songs that I know or just taking examples from existing rhythms, and start simple when it comes to just getting the sound to be consistent. We talked about, quarter notes just on a 4/4, just 1, 2, 3, 4, and doing the kicks in practice just as a way to get the muscle memory in your mouth anatomy to become second nature, and you don't have to think about it as much when it comes to just getting the sound to come out. Now, as it relates to speed training, which is the focus of the discussion today, what I've found to be particularly helpful is incrementally increasing the speed to the point where you can still do the sound quickly, but before it gets so muddy that you lose the actual sound itself. And kicks are kind of interesting because there's a couple different ways you can not necessarily cheat, but you can change the nature of the sound to get more of a rapid rhythm to it, and I'll explain what that means. But if we think about the quarter notes, right, if we were to half the notes for each accelerating rhythm, so quarter notes, eighth notes, and then 16th notes, which is pretty much the fastest I could do a kick just on its own without changing the rhythm slightly, and that would be, starts to border on triplets, which would be slightly different. We're just focusing on the non-specific like groupings, like a triplet pattern. But even the 16th notes in that kind of rapid, almost machine gun fashion is something to kind of work up to, because your lips, specifically when doing the kicks and being able to control the pressure, are not going to be used to having to do that sound so quickly. And so I think being able to just do quarter notes to eighth notes in the beginning, and then maybe varying the rhythm instead of just doing straight single note drills, Makes it a little bit easier to kind of adapt to. So if you're thinking about maybe doing like quarter notes to eighth notes, alternating patterns, something like that's almost like a gallop slightly. But the point is you're not just doing the single notes in a drill. I think it's good to mix it up and kind of force your brain and your anatomy to adapt to doing things that aren't going to be just a single kind of loop. And kind of as an extension of that, we talked about the kind of chaining of things together as it relates to the sounds themselves. If you were to take, and I think I did this in the warm up, I don't really remember exactly what I did, but if we were to just take the single kick and then make it either a quarter note, eighth note, 16th note, but they're all together, and you're not doing anything like a triple kick or like a BTB, like I'll talk about in a sec. So thinking how that mean for a drill beat to practice, and let me see if I can come up with an example that'll make sense here on the fly. But I think I did something like this in the warm up where I went something like it's a rhythm that can be used really easily for something like a build up to a drop. The beat's kind of accelerating. It's not going full speed like you were going to switch to a drum and bass pattern, but it's definitely giving the listener the idea that it's ramping up, right? If we were to take the beat in that example and just add something like a raising pitch throat bass to show that it was ramping up to something like a drop, then that's how you get something in like a dubstep or drum and bass build up to the drop using just the kicks. And this is not using any snares. You could plug snares in too, but for the sake of the exercise, if we're just doing something like and then something like a fill, like a the actual drop itself, that kind of bouncing back and forth rhythm that you're doing is doubling as kind of like a ramp up to give the listener a reason to expect something to change in the song itself. And that kind of, I call it like a ping pongy rhythm where it's just kind of sounds like a ball bouncing back and forth. That would be a good kind of irregular rhythm to practice and getting used to chaining the different durations or speeds of the kicks together so that you, again, get kind of familiar with jumping between different focus of rhythms instead of just a single note or single notation rhythm. And faster than a 16th note, a 30-second note, I can't do on a kick. In fact, I don't think I can do 16 or 30-second notes on any sounds that I do. That's extremely fast. I'm trying to build up to being able to do that with snares, but I don't think I can do faster than 16th notes on the PF. Yeah, even 16th notes, my 16s aren't fast. Eighth notes are fine, quarter notes are fine, but something as fast as a 16th note on a snare, maybe on a BGM or spit snare, because I can cheat and do kind of like a tongue staccato interruption of the sound to get it that fast. So I want to do a 16th note BGM or spit snare. That's I can do, but I'm not doing the sound that fast. I'm doing one sound and I'm interrupting the airflow to get it to come out that fast. So that's not the same thing. That's a slightly cheating way of getting the sound to come out instead of doing the actual separate spit snare in sequence. And people that are really good at spit snares, dudes like Collapse, D-Lo, those guys can do them that fast, that rapid, cleanly. I'm still working up to that, but it is something to kind of keep in mind when it comes to how you're going to manipulate the sound and get it to either give the illusion of speed or being legitimately that fast. And so we talked about just the single notes, again, sticking with kicks for now, and the same thing will sort of apply to hats and snares to some extent. But for the actual alterations to the sound, the best example I can think of would be the sound combo BTB for kicks, which is just the B, which is the kick, and a really light T sound in between to interrupt it and allow you to do it faster. And that creates a double kick sound. And so that sounds like, or triple kick technically. it's three sounds, but the way it interrupts it makes it come across like a triple kick. So instead of, which would be the triple kick on its own, just using the kick sound and nothing else, by doing a BTB, you get, and I think you can use them interchangeably. It just depends on the type of sound you want, but I feel like when people are trying to figure out how to do rapid kicks early on, they'll tend to gravitate towards substituting the BTB as a way to give that more compact version of the sound than just practicing doing it on its own. And I really think that doing it on its own is just as important because it gives you the options to slot in that type of sound depending on what you're constructing. So if we think about the rhythm I was doing before, we could do something like, okay, so if we put the triplet kick in there, you can hear that's the triple kick with just the sound by itself. But if you do the same thing and we slot in BTB instead, you can hear how it slightly changes. So if we use BTB, it would be, it sounds more like you're using a double kick pedal instead of just hitting the kick quickly with your foot. And I'm not a drummer by trade, so I don't know how accurate that is, but to my ear, going to, it's just you're getting a much faster combination of stats with the BTB because by nature that's what it does. It's kind of tricking your ear in the way it comes across auditorially to make you think that you're hearing a rapid triple kick versus doing the kick by itself 3 times, which is harder. To get it to go that fast, you have to be a little bit more skilled than me to be able to get it to sound almost similar. But I like the fact that it sounds distinct so that depending on what effect you want when it comes to creating the patterns and slotting it into the routine, you have options. And I do think that someone just learning would be well served to do both. You know, learn one, learn the other, and see what kind of feels the most natural. Hey, J10Man41, thank you for the follow. Much appreciated. Hope you enjoy your stay amongst the space bees. We have fun here. Also, welcome to the jam stream. So taking the idea of 2 examples of speed, and like we talk about in these sound theory discussions, what I would recommend drill-wise, and this is just based on what I've done. I'm not a professional beatboxer, but I always kind of caveat the discussion with I'm not a pro, but I'm just trying to relate what I've learned in the time that I've been practicing and trying to get better myself. I think starting with the single note kicks, moving up to like 8th note kicks, and then doing something that's going to be a more irregular rhythm to force you to jump between the different rhythm types is a good place to start. And then from there, trying to see in songs that you've heard or listened to where you notice a rhythm that's sticks out and see if you can duplicate it. That's one thing that kind of helped me learn in the beginning. And J Tin Man says, cool stuff, dude. Hey, thanks. Are you a beatboxer? Every once in a while, we'll get people from the actual beatbox community that kind of just find my stream randomly through Twitch. If so, then that's awesome. I'd be more than happy to hear your thoughts on the stuff we're discussing. If not, and you're interested in learning about beatbox stuff, then that's also awesome as well. One thing we do when I'm talking about stuff here, in addition to just trying to illustrate techniques, is if people were curious and trying to get into it or learn, then it serves as kind of like a forum for people to ask questions about where do I start? What are good resources online? What do I want to do if I want to get into beatboxing? And so, yeah, feel free to hang out. We'll be discussing technique and sound theory for a bit longer, kind of going through some examples when it comes to speed training. And then what we usually do in the second half of these streams is I will turn on my synthesizer, which is off right now, so it doesn't feed back the stream. But with my synthesizer that I've hooked up and my loop station, we brainstorm ideas for BGM tracks to use in future projects. Just to give kind of a short elevator pitch on what that means, as part of my content here, I create royalty-free BGM tracks for fellow streamers and content creators to use. And we come up with a lot of those ideas on stream sometimes with feedback from folks hanging out in the chat, and try and put those ideas together so that when I release them in the future, people can see something that they might have contributed to. Jake Tinman says, I like Beatbox a lot, though maybe I'll learn some techniques here for now. Yeah, and so depending on what you know about the, I guess we call it music type, I try and switch the focus of what we discuss every time we do one of these streams. That way we're kind of doing a different focus and explaining different techniques or different concepts. And I'll try and be somewhat thorough in explaining stuff in general, just so if people want to refer back to this stream in the future, since the archives for all my Twitch streams are up on YouTube, since they're temporary on Twitch, it's kind of like a reference library, one for people who might want to see what I've talked about, and also for myself to not repeat things I've talked about. And so next in the kind of discussion of speed is something that's a little bit trickier to practice, I think. At least it was for me. And that's hats. Hi-hats specifically are not something I do a ton of focus on, and maybe I need to kind of force myself to develop different hi-hat sounds a bit more to kind of add some variety to the beats. But if we think closed hi-hats on their own, just a single T sound, just a thinking about it from a basics perspective, I think everyone in concept knows how to do a hi-hat sound. It's just taking the T sound of the letter T without any vocalization and dropping the E. So you're just getting a bit more simple to describe than something like a kick. But getting fast and focusing on speed with hi-hats is tricky because the sound is not hard, but being able to manipulate it is a little bit more difficult, at least to me. And so if we think of the idea of speed, quarter notes, pretty simple. And I think when you're just learning, doing that over and over again probably doesn't require a ton of grinding to get control over the sound and get it to do what you want. But when you start ramping up the speed to eighth notes, then it's starting to force a little bit more control because you're having to be rapid, you're having to be consistent and do it over and over and over without either losing the rhythm or losing the sound or both. Going faster than eighth notes to 16th notes, that's when you start getting into real challenging territory, and this is kind of the realm I don't think I focus on enough. But if we go faster than that to 16th, I think I could do them okay, but my 16th note hats are soft. I could tell immediately that they don't come out as loud. And I think trying to focus on drilling that speed, but getting more force behind the T, just with the tongue, and forcing that to hit a little bit harder. Again, think of like staccato tongue if you play a wind instrument. Getting that to make the sound sharper, more sharp and more crisp, and come across the mic consistently would be a good way to train for that. And I can't do faster than 16ths on hats, I don't think. I can sort of do it, but it becomes very kind of airy, and 30-second notes, I should probably work up to that. I just can't think of too many instances where I'd need to use 30-second note hats. But one thing that hi-hats have, and there's a lot of variation to them that I just don't really focus that much on in my sound, because a hi-hat, if you think of a drum set, can either be something like the actual open close hi-hats. You can have different cymbals that you're going to be hitting with the drumstick that's going to affect the way the sound works. You can manipulate the way the hi-hat sounds just by slightly changing the way you're using your tongue to direct the airflow. And so if you think of closed hat versus open hat, close is the open hat would be and that on its own, not really a groundbreaking concept. But if you try and go between the two as part of a rhythm, if you think of something like a jazz rhythm, if you ever watched Rick and Morty, the snake jazz rhythm would be something like. And that right there, even though it's kind of a silly example, is one of the ones that I used to kind of train early on because I wanted to think of a rhythm that was going to force me to jump back and forth like we talked about with kicks, but slightly change the sound and then go back and forth. That's one thing that you can do. And if you're training for speed and variation, trying to jump between the two and keep them consistent, you ramp up the speed of something like that, and you would get like a faster version of that kind of jazz rhythm, and it would be something like, and it becomes more like almost a swing tempo if you go fast. Thinking about the evolution of the hat sound even more, if you go for a different type of open hat, kind of a more like a brush, I think, instead of a tss, you have a ch. And again, this is just changing the sound slightly, but I think that's still technically a hat sound. And so the reason why I bring all that up is if you're trying to practice speed, you can either do the sounds on their own, like we talked about, or start slotting them together into a complicated rhythm and force yourself to kind of jump back and forth. And let me think of one that might illustrate what I'm talking about, because I didn't prepare any sample rhythms before this. I just had a topic I wanted to kind of discuss. But if we think of maybe something like, and that's just three hat sounds that are very similar but sound slightly different, and you're just alternating through those three in the loop and either changing it up slightly or trying to be consistent and then focusing on having them come out cleanly. I was thinking a good example that I've kind of used a little bit, not only for hat rhythms but just rhythms in general. You folks that have been around here a while know I really like the band Sleep Token, and I talk about him a lot. The drummer, too, who does the drum work for Sleep Token, is an insanely skilled drummer. And he does a lot of things like really complicated hi-hat runs in addition to all like the crazy polyrhythms, percussion type stuff in all their compositions. And I really like listening to his drum work and trying to isolate different things of the rhythms he does and use that as kind of practice. And I think that little hat drill I did bouncing between the three different types was kind of a version of the rhythm in their song Hypnosis. It has these sections where a lot of the guitars and heavier stuff kind of drops out during some of the verses, and there's like a bass line and other stuff going on, but your ear kind of gravitates towards to the rhythms that are being done. And a lot of it's really complicated, more complicated than I can do with just my mouth. But that's a really good example of thinking about something where, hey, that sounds like something that'd be really good to practice and maybe adapt or kind of slot into a pattern or overall routine. And I think that's kind of a good thing to experiment with every once in a while when you're practicing and trying to take ideas for inspiration. In addition to just the repetitive kind of grinding of the single sounds. Looking at artists that have a lot of competency in things like percussion, rhythm, or whatnot will give you a lot of good ideas and say, let me see if I can do that in beatboxing. let's see. Okay, so the third component of the overall toolkit that I wanted to talk about when it comes to speed training and trying to adapt core sounds for doing things faster would be snares. And each snare is going to behave slightly different, obviously, because they're done slightly different. But let's start with the PF snare as the basic example. And I'll just kind of talk through what I've come up with and what I've done as I've been learning, because that was I think that was a second snare I learned. I learned how to do case snares first. But PF, I think, has a lot of utility and function just in general. It's one of my favorites, even though it's considered one of the more elementary snares. I find that it slots well into electronic music, which is a lot of what I do. But in speed, thinking about the rhythm and speed for PF snare, go back to the example that we did with kicks. Quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. With the PFs, it would be pretty simple. Eighth notes, it gets a little bit more tricky just because you're having to use your lip and mouth pressure to get the sound to come out. And doing that quickly is not easy, even if after you've been doing it for a while. But I feel like my eighth note PF snares are fairly consistent. If I do it for long enough, it starts to kind of get muddy as my lips get tired. But overall, I feel like I have decent control over it. 16th note PFs, I straight up can't do. Give it my best shot. Yeah. It is definitely something you can train for, and admittedly, I've been working on some of the more irregular rhythms with PF snares, not just raw speed, because, again, I don't think of too many instances where I'd want to have a machine gun PF snare like that quickly. But you could tell it immediately loses its definition right after I do it. It just goes and it sounds awful. One thing that I wanted to kind of explain, which again, I think I did this in the warm up, but another way to get speed isn't just to do the sound rapid fire like we talked about before, right? And so I call this like a drum and bass lead up to a drop, because I've heard it in a lot of drum and bass songs, but specifically with the PF snare and kicks to get that fast pattern without it just being nothing but PF snares. And that sounds like and again, that's something I would use if I was going to be ramping up to be able to do a drop and then do like switch up to like a drum and bass tempo and go a lot faster. That particular example actually works better with a different snare. And I can't remember if we've ever talked about this here on streams, but the rim shot snare, which is technically it's inward, but there's no breathing. You don't use your lungs. It's all just tongue and pressure to get the sound to come out. And the rim shot sounds like that, by the way, for folks listening at home, that sound took me forever to learn because it is very difficult to describe. I learned how to do the inward case snare somewhat early on. The rim shot is essentially that without breathing, but for some reason, the mechanics of getting the sound to come out, I just couldn't figure out until I watched like 50 million tutorials and someone finally explained it in a way that made sense. But the rim shot is used in a lot of technicality, speed patterns. We talked about things like TKK and the speed sound sets or combo sound sets to get rapid sounds together. You know, TKK or FTKK. That's what the rim shot's used for a lot. But I bring it up because that same drum and bass build-up pattern that I did, I've been using that to train the rim shot so I can get faster with it. And to me, it sounds a lot better than the PF snare. So if I had a choice, I'd rather use the rim shot for that. Because if we do the same thing, again, it was same thing, but we swap the snare for the PF for the rim shot, we get same rhythm, just a different snare. But it because the rim shot uses just the tongue muscle and pressure to do, it's easier than the PF snare, which technically is a breathing external snare. And so if I were to compare the speed of what I can do with that ramp up pattern, I could do it way faster with the rim shot just because it's easier to do and it's less effort. So if we think of just going from and then we ramp up the speed, it's a lot easier to do faster. And if I was going to be putting together something like a pattern or a routine that was drum and bass focused and I needed that build up and I didn't want to try and force the PF snare in that same pattern to be that clean, I would just go for the rim shot, use that, and then that would be the main snare for that portion and maybe the entirety of the song. Because it works pretty well for drum and bass rhythms in general because it's so kind of short and easy to do. But once you're actually doing a drum and bass rhythm, you can swap whatever snare makes sense. I think the one that probably works the least in a fast drum and bass pattern would be the spit snare, the BGM. That one, it's hard to do that one and jump between sounds, at least for me. But doing something like the rim shot in a standard, quote unquote, standard drum and bass rhythm, you think that 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2, pretty easy, and you can use the technicality that also uses the rim shot to fill in parts as well. So to illustrate, you might have something like and it's pretty fast and gets a little bit more tricky when you vocalize a bass with it, but because you're not really using anything that blocks your airway a ton aside from the sound itself, you can kind of mix it in with the rhythm, and rim shot works well there. Do I think that I need to practice kind of messing around with the PF snare in order to get it that fast? Oh yeah, for sure. In fact, next time we do speed training, maybe I'll be able to report in on improving my control over the sound a bit, and it'll sound better. The third option, and I won't go through every single snare in existence as it relates to that particular example. Ooh, we got a hydrate from J Tin Man. Hydration is important, especially in beatboxing. But the third example I'll do before we kind of move on to the next thing in speed training that I wanted to discuss would be the outwards K. And kind of the first one I ever learned way back in the day. And that's the... I still say that I do my outward K different from most people. I don't really talk to a lot of beatboxers in the community anymore just because I haven't really had time to consume content and talk with people. But one thing I probably should have asked when I was newer and just learning, but the outwards K, that one, kind of similar to the PF, is tougher to do rapidly. If you think about like a 16th note, I'm not too happy with how mine sounds. I don't really use the snare that fast. But like we did in the example for the drum and bass rhythm, if I was going to use it as part of a ramp up in that exact same rhythm, doing something like a... then it slots in there fine. In fact, that's probably the second easiest after the rim shot. And I think if I was going to do that, it would be a good substitute if I just wanted to change the sound. J Tin Man says that one's pretty satisfying. It's... the outwards K is kind of like to me, what a lot of people think about when they imagine beatboxing. Maybe that's not true because you hear a lot of PSH snares and whatnot. It was the one that I immediately thought of because it's the closest to, the old example when they say, how do you want to get into beatboxing? You learn boots and cats, right? Boots teaches you the sequence of the rhythm where the kick is. You just take the oots off and you get cats is where you get the snare. You just take the ats and the vocalization off. So you have and just creating the K sound on its own and isolating it and forcing it is how you get the K snare. I don't do mine that way, which is why mine sounds different. Because if you're just focusing on the K sound without any vocalization, you get. And that's done pretty open mouth. When I do the K sound, my mouth is not wide open. Let me think. I'm using tongue pressure. And my teeth aren't clenched, but my teeth are more closed, and I can't have my lips closed. You wouldn't hear the sound at all. But instead of a from the basic starting example, instead of a mine sounds like, and so it's more forceful because it's actual mouth pressure. I know people can do the K that way. It's just not as common. And to me, it gets more punch across when it comes to trying to get the sound on the mic. Also, if you do close your mouth, you get a muted K snare, which is pretty fun to mess around with when it comes to creating like a muted filter effect. And so if I do that exact same sound but close my mouth, you get might not be that audible on the mic because it's a little bit softer. But if you go from to, that's where you get something like a gradual filter that is turning either on or off. I had a routine or pattern I did a long time ago that I kind of forgot about, but it was a drum and bass pattern because I do like drum and bass, but it used that muted K snare to make it sound like a filter. And let me kind of explain. I'll just do the section from the thing, and I just kind of came up with that. It's not something I invented. I know other people have done it too because it's very simple. But what it sounds like when you're taking that and trying to create like an effect on the sound, it would sound like. And so you hear the muted part start to slowly fade out as the filter is being turned off. And then all I'm doing is just opening my mouth. That's it. Just slowly opening my mouth until it's to where it normally would be to get the regular version of the sound to come out. J10 Man says, I like the more force. Yeah, I think if you drill the regular version of the K snare enough, you can get it to sound pretty sharp. It's just going to be slightly different than doing it with tongue and mouth pressure. It's just slightly different technique, but depending on what you focus on, I just never learned it that way. I don't even remember how I learned how to do the K the way I do now, but either way, you can kind of develop the sound however you start and then kind of branch out from there. And as far as speed training, I think it's just trying to focus on getting the sound to come out single note and then doing maybe like a variation rhythm to kind of bounce back and forth and force yourself to get that sound to come out faster. I will think a little bit more on the K snare since I didn't really think I was going to bring it up as part of the discussion here. But if I come up with a good way to kind of practice it in a sample pattern, kind of like I did with the rim shot, I'll bring it up in a future discussion and it'll be kind of captured there. And then real quick to touch on the last major snare of the kind of core set people learn, the BGM or spit snare. That one I'm also going to have to kind of put a pin in and think about ways to develop. I did it a little bit earlier, but just to kind of illustrate here, that particular one is easily the sharpest and most distinct of all the snares because it's done different from all the others. But that's the sounds like a clap. And so doing it on its own, quarter notes, I gotta be careful because this one will blow my mic out if I point directly at it. Using mouth pressure, trying to clamp down on the sound to cut it off and get it to abruptly start and end where you want. Once you know how to do the sound, it's just practicing to get that clean. It's a sound that requires a lot of development just because lip muscle strength is what makes the sharpness. It's just creating a burst of air like if you think about, I think it's like a baby sound where their lips are pressed together and you're forcing air out of your lips. You get kind of a sound. The BGM snare is just that, but instead of keeping a stream of air, you're doing a burst and then using your lips to cut it off. So instead of, you're going, and once you get comfortable with cutting it off, then you make it sharper, and that's how you get the. That one takes a bit of practice, but it's very, very strong, and you can use it to create some really, really good rhythms where you want your snare to have punch, like a lot of sharp punch that's going to really come across on a mic. BGM snare is one of my favorites, but it's difficult to kind of manipulate. If that makes sense. Like we talked about before, I can cheat to get a rapid rhythm with the BGM or spit snare, but if I was going to do it on its own, eighth notes is about as fast as I can do with that one. But if I have the sound and I'm using my tongue to interrupt the airflow, again, think staccato tonguing for a wind instrument, that's how you get. And it's pretty much determined only by how much air I'm forcing out till I run out of breath, and then that's the end of it. But the tongue is interrupting the airflow instead of me clamping my lips down for each note. Again, still gives you the rapid kind of clap snare effect. It's just not true speed. It's cheating a little bit. I will give some thought into both the K snare and the BGM snare and think about what I would do if I was going to teach someone or explain like a good speed drill. That'll be a good thing to think about for the future. Let's see. Before we move on to working on BGM stuff, I did mention that I wanted to kind of apply this idea for speed to some of the sounds that aren't just the core set, like kick, hat, snares. And depending on the sound, the principle sort of remains the same. You want to do the sound quickly and get control over ramping up your speed slowly until you get comfortable. That doesn't really change, but I'll give two examples in the sound set. The first one will be the lip roll, the regular lip roll, and that one sounds like. That one, I think it's technically classified as a bass sound, but in order to do it quickly, you would start in the same spot, right? Quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're doing, the way you do the sound is different from things like we talked about up to this point. But if you think about single notes, quarter notes. A little bit more difficult because you're using airflow and it requires kind of control on the corner of your mouth to get that sound to come out. But if you ramp up the speed, and I can't do eighth note lip rolls. I can, but I apparently can't do it on a consistent rhythm. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I can't do 16ths. Jason Man says, "Oh, I love that one." It's a really cool technique. It took me a while to learn it because I couldn't wrap my brain around the concept. But it's really cool for creating that kind of synthy bass effect in a beat. And so if you think about, again, I want to try and use examples, especially if you're new to beatboxing, but in like an actual rhythm. So maybe something like. Just an example, but there is a way to cheat with that one too. It changes the sound, but if you want it to be fast, so if you want to have the lip roll alternating with another sound quickly, real quick explanation, this is not going to be helpful to learn because you really need to see somebody's face when they're explaining how to do this technique. You don't breathe in for the lip roll. It's all mouth pressure, but it's in the corner of your mouth where your lips meet and your pulling air in through a small gap in order to get your lip to reverberate, and that gets the sound. It is a super simplified explanation of the technique. If you're interested in learning the lip roll, I highly recommend you go in on YouTube and just look up Beatbox lip roll tutorial. I had to watch a bunch till it was explained in a way that I could do. But once you get the actual sound to come out, you just have to practice getting it to be consistent, because when you first figure out where the position is and you get it to go, it's going to sound kind of muddy and unclean. But just practicing it over and over, you get better at doing it, and you can do it faster. So lip roll, fun technique. It's been pretty popular for quite a few years. It was popularized earlier on in the 2010s from what I remember. But if you want to get it to go fast, you can breathe out or force the air out of the same area where you're doing the sound, and that sounds like, and it's not exactly the same, but if you just force the air in and out of the same spot, you can do the sound rapidly. Again, it'll make sense when I do it. It's hard to describe without seeing somebody's face. But the regular lip roll, but you want to do the rapid one, that's just forcing the air out of the same spot. Hey, Sour Lad, how's it going? Welcome to the Jam stream. We are talking about technique and sound theory. And so yeah, if you go force the air in and out of the same spot, that's how you get them. And if you do that really fast, you can actually do that sequence incredibly quick, because it's just the same spot, air in and out, once you know how to do the inward one. And that would, ramping up the speed, you get. And if you ramp it up even faster and tighten the gap where the sound is coming from on the corner of your mouth, you get a variation I don't hear a lot of people do. I don't even know if it's got an official name. I kind of call it like almost like a 8-bit type of bass. It doesn't have an official term, but if you speed it up really fast, it changes the sound so much that it goes from to and I still have yet to figure out a good place to use that in a routine. It's fun to do, and it's really good training once you know how to do the lip roll, because it makes your corner of your embouchure, that upper lip muscle, that part of doing the sound, it trains it extremely hard, and it'll make your face hurt, but it'll make you a lot better at doing the sound. So as far as, like, again, kind of a cheating way to get a rapid version of the sound, that's one way to do it. And again, I don't think I invented that. I just don't hear that version of the high speed rapid lip roll used that much. And I guess the second example, which you can't really do fast because it requires a lot of air, but in the interest of discussing techniques, kind of give some context, like for you folks that are listening. Boss fight lip bass. It reminds me of some kind of old school 8-bit, like really fast bass line type stuff. Very Sunsoft-esque to me. But the inward lip roll is like the cousin to the regular lip roll that actually uses your lungs and air power breathing in from that same spot with a punch at the beginning, instead of getting that, again, kind of, it's a rolling, oscillating sound that sounds kind of like a synth. You get a punch, heavy bass for the inward lip roll, and that sounds like. That's the high siren version that I tend to gravitate towards. But that one you can't really do fast because it's such a punch and forceful sound. You can drag it out and make it longer. You can do as long as you can breathe. But doing it rapid, maybe you could do something like a multiple punch of a bass line in a drop, something like. But like doing it rapid, I can't think of too many instances where that would work in a song. Just because, one, it requires quite a bit of air to do, and it kind of stops every other sound you're doing. But I may have to think about that. I think it's easier to do the loose lip roll than the inward one for fast. Apparently, I can't do it more than twice. Not clean. I might have to work on that a bit more. But now we're kind of drifting into bass sounds, and the idea of speed training for bass sounds is a little bit different than the regular core instrument sounds. I really like to focus on things like bass for these technique and sound theory discussions. If you want a kind of in-depth discussion of some stuff I was working on, check out the last jam stream from about a month ago where I talked about a new variation of vibration bass that I've been working on. We'll definitely be returning to that discussion again, although I think next time I do one of these, it'll be technicality and kind of rotate between different topics. I realized, this is kind of embarrassing, but I created a loop to use as background music when I was doing my explanations of the stream and what our agenda was today, and I just never turned it on. I don't normally have background music when I'm doing the discussion and explanation, but usually as a way to intro the stream, I'll throw on a really quick loop that I made just for background music, and I kind of liked it, even though it's just 2 tracks. So here's what I came up with before we move on to actual BGM brainstorming. It's just a rhythm and a bass line. Oh well. Maybe next time I'll remember to actually turn it on when I start yapping at the beginning of the stream. But what we can do is segue into the BGM brainstorming part of the stream. While I'm switching my sound sources around so that I can have my mic separate from my loop, if anyone that's been hanging out has questions on stuff that I talked about or just questions about beatboxing in general, this is not like a Q&A session. You can ask questions literally anytime in the stream. But since I've been talking for a bit, if you have any questions, then I'd gladly field them as we get ready to move into the next part of the stream. So I will give it a second while I switch my mic source around, and then we will update my caption and see what we can come up with for BGM ideas. This would help if I actually plugged my mic into the right input. Okay, you folks should be able to hear me. It's going to sound different because my mic is going through my Scarlett now. But let me turn on the synth. Let me make sure I didn't screw up my audio sources. You folks hear the piano in the background? Okay. Are we on ads? Stupid ads. Let me know if we are on ads, because I did want to kind of do a real quick explanation of how I do all this stuff before we actually get into it, for folks who might not have seen it before. Yeah, change my caption in the meantime. Okay. All right. So to kind of explain what we're doing here and how I do these BGM recordings. That's a whistle. I have this synthesizer hooked into my loop station, which is my
sound interface for the majority of the beatbox stuff whenever I'm doing these streams. It's an RC505 Mark 1. Pretty common tool in kind of the looping scene in general, but also in the beatbox scene. I've had this thing for several years now, but I use this to record and capture the different instrumental things that we come up with for the BGM tracks, and then we compile those into a fully formed track that I record on my computer at a later date, and then that's what goes into the releases in the future. And I guess I can illustrate here. You're going to see my model sort of tweak out as I turn towards my synthesizer, which is next to me. So if you see the camera kind of wig out, it's because I'm looking over here. But if we were to establish a rhythm to set up the BPM for the song and put that on our first track, what we'll do is I'll kind of come up with a real quick series of ideas, put them together, and kind of explain how the loop station works. So let's get the rhythm first. Okay. Now that you can hear it repeating, let me put it about here. Let me know if you can't hear the loop playback. Okay. So we've got the core rhythm being looped, and now we can layer additional sounds on top to fill out the rhythm. So if we had hats, again, we'll kind of do it rough here. I won't worry about finalizing anything. This is just an example. Next up, we normally go from rhythm to bass line. Let's do a string bass line using an effect called guitar to bass. We can boost the low end to give it kind of more of a low push. But if we go on the strings and the low end, maybe something like that. Okay, bass line's captured. And I can change the mix of everything that's playing back while it's looping. I think we want the bass line to be a little bit higher than the rhythm. Now, if we were thinking about like a high melody, let's go, I'm a big fan of slicer. That'd be a good kind of way to just to illustrate what we're doing here. Let's go panning delay slicer on 16th notes. And we're going to use 329. It's in 329 because that's one of my favorites for the example here. Now, where are we going to put it? That could work. A little bit loud. We'll sync it up with the bass line. It's kind of a long bass line. I'm going to switch it up a little bit. Okay, now it's looping. I did see the hydrate and stretch from Sour Lad. Oh. Okay, now we can think of an additional part to kind of layer in. So we go back to strings. Then we do two chord strings in the background. Let's see. Drop that down a little bit in the mix. Okay, I'm going to illustrate what we can do with all of this with just these four. This is 4 separate tracks. They're all looping at the same time, having been captured, synced up to the same BPM, all playing at once. But I have control over what's actively playing at any given time. So let's say we wanted to drop the bass out. Drop the beat out. Bring the bass back. Bring the beat back. In addition to being able to control which tracks are playing and coming or going at any given time, we've also got track level effects that will affect everything that's playing if I want, and can add additional sort of distortions or whatnot. A good example would be filter. This is, which one is this? This is bass pass filter. There's high and low. This is the one in the middle, I guess. We can cut the beat up with beat repeat, which takes a section, depending on how high the knob is set, and it basically repeats it, kind of like you're cutting back on a record. And you can just turn it on and off. It's an interesting way to create drops doing this. This type of song wouldn't really be good for drops, but I'm just illustrating how the effect works. This is probably a better way to do it. we've done that before. That can be kind of fun when doing like, again, drop bass songs. I think it's a little loud. Let me drop it a bit. Kind of be careful about the volume I'm recording all these at. Okay. I might actually keep this one. It could be refined a bit, but not bad. We'll save it. So the way the whole quote-unquote production, I'm not a producer. I'm still learning on the fly. But the way this works is once I have all the different loop tracks captured, and there's 5 tracks in total. Now we have 4 that are recorded. I could record another one if there was an additional layer I wanted to add. But once I have them all recorded, at some point I'll sit down on my computer with my recording software, and I will actually quote unquote perform the song from start to finish by, you know, turning the different tracks on in the order I want, throwing on the effects, adjusting the mixing and the volume composition, and then that's what I record, and then that gets tweaked a little bit, mixed, and then that's what goes into the final releases. And it's kind of an unusual, like non-standard way of recording because I can't record each track on its own. I technically could, but then I'd have to just record each one and then kind of fit it all together. Instead, I record the whole thing on one track being performed, and I do a lot of the editing and mixing on the loop station itself since I have control over that. But I have a couple ideas on how I'm going to switch the formula up for specifically Halloween's release. I got some ideas and some things I want to try that might result in some kind of more complex things compared to what we've done in the past. But that's a real quick surface level demonstration of how the loop station works. It's a very powerful tool, and when hooked up to something like a synthesizer, I can kind of combine all the different instruments that the synthesizer has with a lot of the effects and things that the loop station does. And that's how we're able to create a lot of the stuff that we've released so far. All right. So let's save this on a new file and we'll start from scratch. But before we do, I'm going to go refill my drink real quick. So what I will do is I'm going to put this one that we just finished just on loop so that it's not dead silence while my model goes to sleep. And what I'll do is I will come back and we'll jump into actually brainstorming one from the ground up. So let me turn this on and I'll be back in one sec. All right. Sorry about that. I am back. Okay. Let us pick up where we left off. Let me clear the track. Make this file empty. And now we start all over. Now, I mentioned that I wanted to work on some stuff for future releases. And I think we did one last time. I was going to kind of repurpose into something for Halloween. Let's just focus on coming up with ideas and maybe kind of switch genres a bit. And I'll worry less about whether or not I'm going to use it for an immediate release. Just kind of come up with some ideas. So I'm thinking we do something a bit more up-tempo in energy. Like a electronic, not necessarily a dance track, but something that's got a bit more kind of pickup to the rhythm. And so let's get the electronic drum kit here and see what we can kind of come up with. Where's my clap? We could do some kind of more of a, not a staggered, but something like that, and kind of build like some more instruments around it. Again, we'll just have experiment around and see what we come up with. I want to use claps. That's why I had tried to figure out where my clap was here. Okay. Two repeats. That one we can definitely drop down in volume. It's a little bit stronger of a sound. It would help if I put it in the same spot. Did not make my job easier by making that a 2 repeat. I think we can work with it. There we go. Add in some hats. There we go. I was looking for my open hat. Okay, that gives us kind of a bit more of a complicated beat to kind of work around. Again, going from beat to bass line, I think we can probably employ a sliced bass line to get something rapid, but let's go 8s first. And we're going to boost with guitar to bass. Now let's find an actual instrument to use. We can go upwards if we want it to sound kind of more ominous. Almost sounds like a boss theme now. Let's try it. We're gonna add another same note progression, but a different bass instrument underneath to give it kind of more of a, almost like a signal type sound. Very kind of ominous and aggressive. Now high melody. I got an idea. I like harpsichords. Let's see if we can find a way to add some harpsichords in this. This is it by itself. We can add a little bit of panning delay to move it around in the sound a little bit. Okay, let's record that. Okay, now it's looping. We could octave it. Drop one down. What we're going to do is we're going to layer the octave right on top of the other one. I think I need to drop down even more. We don't want it to overtake the higher one, just kind of layer underneath it. Okay, next, maybe choir. I think we're gonna start here. No, maybe just 2 notes is fine. Could even, we could filter that. Now let's plug that in and see how it sounds. Okay, I think we need something a bit more kind of forceful to really kind of push the energy in a more of a heavier, darker direction. try guitar. Maybe power chords. I don't know if the filter is doing enough there. If we take the filter off, just so you can hear what the instrument sounds like. This is a distorted or overdriven guitar. Alright, without the filter. Might not even need the filter. Whoops, bad. Alright, I got an idea. We're gonna slice this up. Okay, let's plug this in and see how it sounds with everything else. We're going to go up an octave this time. Another effect that I didn't show off before. I can change the key. I can change it manually, but this is an effect that actually transposes the entirety of the loop tracks that are playing, either up or down. So if this is up. If I wanted to kick all of them down a certain amount of steps, then I just transpose it, and it basically forces the key up or down, whichever way I tell it to go. Doesn't sound very good, but that's how it works. We also have something that'll sort of reslice and reconfigure the entirety of the tracks based on like a scattered pattern. It's called beat scatter. Which pattern is that? Oh, it's 4. Okay. There's a 16th note scatter pattern that it's taking, and it's basically reshuffling everything that's playing right now and restructuring it based on the pattern that's coming from this particular rhythm. It creates an interesting effect. I don't really use it a ton for actual finished tracks. Yeah, this is with it all the way up. That could work decently if we take the effect off of the bass line and the rhythm. What I can do is I can basically toggle whether or not the track level effects that are doing these different things affect everything that's playing, or I can turn it on or off for certain ones. So this is taking the scatter and it's only applying it to the harpsichord and then the guitar line that we added on track 5. Where's low pass filter? This is low pass. Okay, let's save our work first so I don't accidentally switch files and lose everything I've done. I have done that before. It's very embarrassing. But now we have 5 tracks recorded as we were kind of going through and adding different instruments and whatnot for this one. I think this one probably makes sense. What we're going to do is kind of structure the idea of how it's going to be performed and actually recorded. Not necessarily because I'm committed to whatever I do here, but just kind of give an idea for how we would start the song, kind of segue, and then like start, middle, end. And then when I eventually sit down and record these, then I can refer back to the stream and see what we talked about. But I think it makes sense to start with the harpsichord first. I did not realize I recorded it slightly out of sync. But I think that actually works. What we could do is have the harpsichord start us off. We bring in the bass. We fade in the choir synth. And then we go with the bass. I might have to figure that out with the harpsichord. It doesn't start at the same time as the beat. There's a slight delay. I think I could work around that without having to re-record the whole thing. Maybe cut the beat out for a second. Bring in the guitar. Let all these play for a bit, and now start messing around, taking out certain tracks like the bass. Now think about how we would go from like the middle to the outro. We fade out all the other ones. And potentially end with the harpsichord the same way we started. Yeah, that's a slight error. When I start all the tracks at once, the harpsichord line is delayed by like 2 measures. I recorded it too late. But when I'm actually doing the recording on my machine, then I just have to sync it up properly so that it's playing when it needs to play. That's kind of something that I need to be aware of. Usually when I do a 1 measure repeat on the rhythm, it keeps that mistake from happening. But I think I might have recorded it in the middle of the repeat instead of after the second. That's probably why that happened, because it's supposed to have... That's supposed to be the start, but I recorded it like 2 measures late. That's not a big deal. Yeah, the beat scatter's fun, but I don't know if I want to put it on here. Filter could be another effect to add as like a mid song transition or something in the middle. That'd be more functional, I think, but we'll have to see. Okay. I think that one will work. I need to figure out what I could potentially use that for, but I think that might slot into the Hawaiian Halloween project. We'll see. That's going to be an ambitious one. I need to spend some more time working on the tracks. But looking at the time, I'm on a schedule today. Otherwise, I would go into another one and we'd try and knock out a couple tracks today. But I think what we'll do is we'll call it here. Let me see who is online that we can raid, and we'll get ready to wrap up for today. Oh, let's see. Not a lot of people I know are on today. I do see Icy Jackets is online, though. He is playing Code Vein 2. Oh, yeah, that did come out, didn't it? Let's see how Jackets is doing. I might have to dip abruptly since I still need to play the first one, and I might play Code Vein at some point. I don't want to get spoiled. But we can at least see how everything is going over on his stream. Let me go ahead and mute all of the non-mic sources. We will go ahead and go to outro. And we will call that a jam stream for today. Hopefully the discussion on beatboxing and technique and stuff was interesting to folks. I do think we got some good ideas going for BGM brainstorming. Hopefully next time I'll have a bit more time to allot to that. But in the meantime, thanks for hanging out today. We will be back roughly the same time tomorrow afternoon, and we'll be checking out something brand new on the channel. That's probably going to be a fixture for a bit. So if you want to see what my latest obsession is, feel free to stop on by. In the meantime, hope everyone has a good rest of your morning, day, or evening, and we'll catch you in the next one. Now let's go see how the codes and veins are going on Icy Jacket's stream. Catch you folks later.